Swahili, because you have people, even as far afield as the DRC speaking Swahili in some parts, as well as closer to your region in East Africa. You do have that wide market, and you have the authors who write in Kiswahili. What about in other areas, though, in other countries where there seems to be a dearth? There are fewer of our authors writing in their mother tongue. They opt to write in French or in English.
Yes, there's always the issue of the audience and the issue of attitude towards these languages. So many writers would want to write in languages that reach the wider audiences, and these languages are generally English, French, and others. So what we are doing is that when we begin to publish bilingual issues or in languages such as Kiswahili, we reach those audiences as well. And this has a trickle-down effect where we encourage even creative writers, therefore, to consider languages such as Kiswahili as equally important and equally accessed medium for their own creative outputs. So you are right to note that, yes, you are right to note that Kiswahili has had a wider spread in the region. But in terms of creative writing and in terms of the knowledge research, knowledge and research that is done on these works, the circulation is not as wide as the spoken language itself is.
And is it also for you fishing out, finding those authors, if they're not widely known? How do you spread the word to tell authors and also poets that you want to get their work so that they can be translated and so that they can be disseminated to Kiswahili speakers, for instance, and then beyond also?
Actually, what we are doing, on the contrary, is we are focusing more on the publishing of academic work in Kiswahili. The problem is not so much in terms of the creative works that are written in those languages. It is in terms of the research, the secondary research that focuses on those primary texts, not making the reach in terms of wider circulation. So when we focus on critical essays, for example, in our journal, what we are doing is we are then drawing the attention of the world to the creative work that have already been published in Kiswahili and other indigenous languages. So I think the project is bipronged in the sense that, on the one hand, we are raising the visibility of critical research in Kiswahili, focusing on critical and creative works in Kiswahili. Right. And at the same time, then putting both of them at the same level of significance.
Dr. Godwin Siundu, thank you very much for joining us this morning. And he is from the Journal of East African Literature and Cultural Studies at the University of Nairobi.
Newsday on the BBC World Service. The UK government expects more than 500,000 Hong Kongers to migrate under a new government scheme that opens this week in response to a crackdown in Hong Kong on pro-democracy protests. The programme allows those with colonial-era British national overseas status and their close family to obtain visas and pursue a path to UK citizenship. It was drawn up in response to a sweeping national security law passed by Beijing last year, which has been used to crush dissent in Hong Kong. Rebecca Henschke and Grace Tsoi followed one protester, who we are calling H, on the journey.
H pushes a black Liberate Hong Kong flag into his suitcase. At the age of 25, he's fleeing, going overseas alone for the first time.
I don't want to go. I was born and raised in Hong Kong, so I have really mixed feelings. But I have great fears about what will happen if I stay.
His mother quietly says goodbye to her only child, not knowing when they will see each other again.
I'm heartbroken. He will not be there if anything happens to me. And I won't be able to take care of him. I can't make him soup. I want my son by my side, but there is no other way. At this point, it's better for him to leave.
A friend drives him to the airport, a taxi thought too risky. Through the city, where for over a year, H has been involved in huge protests, demanding more democracy in Hong Kong and less Chinese influence. A movement that ended with a government crackdown and the arrests of its young leaders. And H2 worries he could be detained. My brain isn't functioning that well, he says with a nervous laugh. I feel like an exile or a refugee. But in his bag is a key document. H was born 2 years before Britain handed back Hong Kong to China, so he has a British overseas passport, opening a path to UK citizenship for him. But he's anxious about the future.
My English might not be fluent enough to deal with daily life, and there's cultural differences. But when it comes to a moment like this, you can't worry too much and can only go step by step.
This is the 1528.
After flying to London, he caught the train to the northern town of Sheffield, where Thomas, his best friend who is living there, was relieved to meet him.
I was very happy that he's here, because when he came to England at that time, it wasn't that safe to travel anyway. You heard stories saying that especially young people, people that try to leave Hong Kong, got arrested in the airport. That's quite scary.
So we've come into where you're staying, in a small bedroom in a share house. And what are some of the things that you brought from Hong Kong? I can see a flag over here. It says, "Liberate Hong Kong, revolution of our times."
Yeah, it is one of our famous slogans that in our protest last year. So it's quite meaningful for me. It's a reason that I brought from Hong Kong.
Do you think you made the right decision?
Probably it is the right decision because Hong Kong's situation is going worse.
We've walked up a hill to Hardcourt Road here in Sheffield. On one side, there's a little bit of English woods, and on the other side, residential houses. It's a grey day here, and the leaves are thick and wet beneath our feet. This name, Hardcourt Road, has a lot of meaning for those from Hong Kong. It's where the government buildings are and where many of the protests and clashes took place. H likes to come here. 4 months after moving to the UK, he's struggling.
The opportunity that I can go back to Hong Kong is changed just like I believe to I need to. And also, it will be inevitable to feel a little bit homesick and miss my friends and a lot of families. Yeah.
He doesn't call his mum. They text, though. She's kept her only child's room as he left it, the bed neatly made, not knowing when they can meet again.
If Hong Kong is still under the control of the Chinese Communist Party, it will be difficult. I may not be able to see him for the rest of my life, but his safety is most important.
The mother of Hong Kong protester H, ending that report by Rebecca Henschke and Grace Tsoi. And you can hear more on their story on assignment here on the BBC World Service.
You're listening to Newsday, and a couple of top headlines this morning. President Joe Biden has set out plans to place climate change at the heart of American domestic and foreign policy. And WHO specialists in China looking into the source of the coronavirus outbreak will be able to expand their investigations as they come out of quarantine today. And now let's get the latest sports news. Here's James Gregg.
Thank you, Bola. What on earth is going on in the Premier League this season? Not sure many predicted the fact that Sheffield United, who'd just won just once this season, before last night's trip to title-chasing Manchester United, would have had such a big say in the title race. A 2-1 victory for Chris Wilder's side stopped Manchester United from going top.
I think outfield players cost about £2.5 million. So we're right up against it straight away. We've got a few injuries, but there was a belief. Been on the receiving end of many tight games this season. Big moments tonight went for us, and we managed to sneak it over the line.
Well, the Blades are still 10 points from relegation safety at the bottom of the table. As for Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, it was a real opportunity missed to go back above rivals Manchester City.
They've been terrific the last couple of months. I've had nothing but praise for them. We won tight games. Games like this we won. Tonight wasn't our night.
It wasn't their night indeed. Sheffield United's next trip, by the way, is against Manchester City at the weekend. Elsewhere, Thomas Tuchel's first game in charge of Chelsea was one to forget as they were held to a really boring 0-0 draw with Wolves. In fairness to him, he'd only taken training once prior to last night's game.
There is no room for disappointment now. There's no room for doubts. I was very happy with the performance, energy-wise, with our intensity. If this was our starting point, I'm looking forward where we will end up.
There was only one other winning side last night, aside from Sheffield United. It was Burnley. They came from behind to beat Aston Villa at home. Elsewhere, around Europe, Juventus and Atalanta are through to the Coppa Italia semi-finals. But from the previous night's Milan derby, Zlatan Ibrahimovic has had to deny claims that he was using racist language towards Romelu Lukaku. Zlatan and Lukaku had a fiery exchange. That was before Lukaku scored. He helped Inter to the semi-finals of the Coppa Italia too. Lionel Messi scored last night as well for Barcelona, as they beat Rayo Vallecano to get themselves through to the quarter-finals of the Spanish Cup. Now, the group stages have been completed at the African Nations Championships, or the rescheduled CHAN 2020. That's the tournament for locally based players. We've been talking about that a bit on the programme this week here on Newsday. Guinea and Zambia progressed. Guinea drew 2-2 with Tanzania and Zambia drew 0-0 with Namibia. So that means that Guinea will play Uganda in the quarter-finals and Zambia take on the holders Morocco. Jennifer King has made history by becoming the first black woman to be appointed a full-time coach in the NFL. Her promotion to assistant running backs coach has been confirmed by the Washington football team. And in Karachi, between South Africa and Pakistan in cricket, Pakistan have a lead now of over 150, 371 for 9 at the moment. What a recovery that is. South Africa with lots of work to do on day 3 of that match. And next hour, I'll be taking a deeper look at the Olympics. What's happening with that? I'm not sure it's going to be going ahead. Stay with us here on Newsday for more sports, or you can head to bbc.com/sports as ever.
Thanks very much, James Gregg.
Let's go back to Ethiopia now, because earlier this month, the government decided to slash taxes on sanitary products from 30 to 10%, all in the name of ending period poverty. That's a phrase which simply means some women are too poor to afford tampons and pads. But here's the problem. Even after these tax cuts, some women still can't afford them. So, how can you really tackle a problem like this? That's what Alan Kasuja's been looking at for today's episode of the Africa Daily podcast.
35 million women are on period age. 75% of the women don't have access for sanitary pad.
That's Sedenia Gebremarcus. She's an ambassador for Jagnit, a campaigning group based in Ethiopia that focuses on empowering women.
What are this 75% of women out of the 35 million using?
And what are they using?
I can start from, a piece of rag, a sock, a sponge. I can go on and on. And women use dry grass. Women use a leaf. We use a cow dung for fuel. Traditionally, it's a traditional fuel. Women use that too.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but cow dung?
Yes, a cow dung. In fact, they mix it with mud and with soil and cow dung when it's wet, and then they put it on their underwear, and then when it's dry, they use it so that it doesn't leak when their blood flows.
Now, that's shocking, isn't it? And as you can hear from Sedenia's words, this is a subject that's very close to her heart, and she's been speaking about it to people across the country.
I was invited to go to Awasa University to just have a talk with the graduate students. And then we heard there is a company that provides a mattress for the students at the university. And then they always complain all over the country. Every time they collect the old one, the women dorm, the sponge, the inside part of the mattress has been cut out in so many spots. And then they always ask, why is the female mattress is always being cut out? It feels like a rat eat it. So the problem is the women, the girls, they don't get sanitary pad. They use the sponge, put it in a sock, and they use it as a pad. And then most of the time in very rural area, women, they're forced to stay outside during their menstruation period.
When you say stay outside, what do you mean?
The husbands, they don't want to be in the same room with them when they're seeing their period, because there is beliefs, she's dirty, or she might bring bad luck to me. That's how the husbands stay. So they stay outside the house. So what do the women do? They will have a separate mud house, and then they dug up a hole. Probably they might fill it with an ash, or they might fill it with a soil, and they sat on that hole. And then when they finish, they just cover it. They cover the soil with a mud, or with a soil, or with an ash, because they don't have anywhere else to go or anything else to do.
Wow. And that story about sitting outside and sitting on a hole is a story that I've heard about from northern Uganda. It's done there as well. And that is so difficult to hear. So difficult to hear. How easy is it to talk about periods in Ethiopia?
It is a taboo. We came across a data that I may not be exact with the number, probably 10 or 12% of mothers only talk to their children about period. Most of the time, young girls find out about their period from their older sisters, or mostly they find it out from school and then from friends.
So if mothers are not talking to their children about their period, I won't even ask you about fathers.
No, the thing is, even the fathers, they don't even know how their mothers managed it. Probably nowadays, and you see a few husbands, you see them buying pads for their wives and then buying pads for the girls. But mostly, let's talk about the rural area. Nobody talks about it, because the fathers actually, they don't know. To be honest with you, some of them, probably most of them, they don't even know when their kids see period. Some of them might think, you had a sex with somebody. I can speak for myself. I have 2 boys. Actually, I don't have girls. I have 2 boys. But now they are in the age where they teach them in school about body changing. So last time they came and asked me, Mama, yes, I said, why do women bleed? In a way they can understand it. And I told them why women bleed, and they were like, So they have seen me using pad, and they said, now I remember, you used to use a mama diaper. I said, no, that's not a diaper. Actually, it's called a pad. So that's what we use. So this is how I talk to them. One of the reasons we're doing this campaign is to teach parents. People need to talk to their kids, even the boys, they should know about it. And then most of the guys, most of the husbands, they don't know anything about it. That's why they consider the pad as a luxury.
Sedenia Gibrimarcos, an ambassador from the Jegnig Group in Ethiopia, speaking there to Alan Kasuja and the Africa Daily podcast. That's our news show, produced by the Newsday team, which each day will try to answer one question about one story on the news in Africa. Just search for Africa Daily wherever you get your podcast from, so you can have a listen too.
This is the BBC World Service.
I was walking around that hospital like a zombie.
I'm Marie Keyworth. I'll be exploring the idea that we can feel too much empathy and compassion.
Right now, I can't face picking another parent up off the floor.
And how can we steel ourselves against the distress without becoming hard-hearted?
The fatigue that we have is not letting ourselves feel that.
Compassion Fatigue, Sunday at 14 GMT. And at 8:30 GMT, Business Daily with Ed Butler.
It's now a full year since Mongolia became the first nation in the world to close its school gates wholesale to fight COVID-19. Since then, 200 billion school days have been lost around the world. What is the real price of so much missed education?
This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
to hold talks. As the protesters filmed on their mobile phones, Culture Ministry officials demanded the group move on, citing COVID-19 restrictions. Then, visibly angered at being filmed, the Culture Minister appeared to strike the phone from the hand of one of the protesters.
The US Senator and former presidential candidate Bernie Sanders says he's raised $1.8 million for charity over the past 5 days through the sale of merchandise with his image at President Biden's inauguration. Senator Sanders was pictured sitting alone with his arms and legs crossed, wearing a brownish-grey parka and recycled woolen mittens. BBC News.
Thank you for that news and welcome to Newsday. Bola Mosro and James Cocknell with you. In a moment we'll be hearing from those for and against President Biden's new climate policy. The WHO can get down to business in Wuhan in China, and we'll head to Moscow to get the latest reaction to the detention of Alexei Navalny. We also have sports and business news on the way. If you want to share your views on any of those stories, go to BBC World Service on Facebook and Twitter, or you can send us a text. Our number is +44 77 86 20 50 85.
And we start in the United States, where President Joe Biden has signed a series of executive orders designed to address climate change, including a new ban on some energy drilling. In fact, it's a complete overhaul. The orders aim to freeze new oil and gas leases on public lands and double offshore wind-produced energy by 2030. President Biden stressed that in his administration, climate change will be at the heart of big, long-term strategic decision-making.
It's a whole-of-government approach. Put climate change at the center of our domestic, national security, and foreign policy. It's advancing conservation, revitalizing communities in cities and on the farmlands, and securing environmental justice. Our plans are ambitious, but we are America. We're bold. We're unwavering in the pursuit of jobs and innovation, science and discovery. We can do this. We must do this, and we will do this.
Well, Mr. Biden's plans are expected to meet stiff resistance from the energy industry, including from our next guest, Kathleen Scammer. She's president of the Western Energy Alliance, which represents the interests of oil and gas companies across many U.S. western states. And they're launching a legal move against part of the president's initiatives. And she joins us now. Greetings to you, Ms. Scammer. Can you first react to what President Biden announced? You know, he said in particular that climate change is an existential threat to the United States. Do you agree with that?
Well, I'm not sure I totally agree with that, but it is certainly a major issue that we need to address. And that's why in the oil and natural gas industry, we're very proud that we are the #1 reason the United States has reduced so many greenhouse gas emissions. The increased use of natural gas in the electricity sector has reduced more greenhouse gas emissions than wind and solar energy combined. And we do that by producing it here in the United States in an environmentally responsible manner.
You're suing the president, though, saying that his executive order exceeds presidential authority, his executive order on freezing of oil and gas leases. What kind of revenues are generated by this extraction, and is that why you're challenging what he's done?
Well, we return around $4.5 billion to the American taxpayer every year from onshore federal development in the western states. His order banning leasing would result in a GDP drop of $33.5 billion a year, and it would kill 58,000 jobs annually. I'm sorry, that's $33.5 billion over his first term. So, you know, his plans would result in fewer jobs in the West. He's decided that he wouldn't pay a political price for killing jobs in the West. But, you know, we have an important energy resource here in the West, and a lot of it is on public lands where we develop it to protect the environment and return revenue to the American taxpayer.
However, he said that his new policy will actually create jobs. He said, you know, in terms of producing power without carbon pollution in the electric sector, he said it's also creating jobs because of economic competitiveness. You don't agree with that?
Well, we heard the same thing at the beginning of the Obama administration, and that administration spent billions of dollars in subsidies and really didn't create that many jobs, whereas we in the oil and natural gas industry managed to increase jobs. We provide about 10.3 million jobs. We support 1.3 trillion in economic activity every year. And by shutting down U.S. oil and natural gas production, we don't take away the demand for people to drive their cars and heat their homes. All we do is put that energy at risk, and we risk our national security by having to import it from Russia, Saudi Arabia, and other countries.
Kathleen Scammer, President of the Western Energy Alliance, thank you very much for joining us.
And listening to that is Kieran Suckling, Chief Executive of the Centre for Biological Diversity, a non-profit conservation organisation which seeks to protect endangered species and wild places. Hi, Kieran. Welcome to the programme. What did you make of those arguments then?
I really don't think they make sense. The pause that the president has put in place is only on new oil and gas leases and only on public lands. Public lands only produce about a quarter of the oil and gas in the United States, so it's not nationwide. And of the public lands that are already leased for oil and gas, 50% are unused to date on land, and 77% are unused to date in the water. So the fact of the matter is the oil and gas industry has plenty of years left of drilling on land and water while we make the transition to clean energy, which will produce far more jobs.
Well, that's an interesting point, isn't it? Because the argument you just heard there was that this is going to hurt the economy. It's going to cost jobs. It's going to cost money to the American Treasury.
Yeah, that won't be the case because they have plenty of leases in hand. This only applies to new leasing. And while that existing leases get played out, that is the time to transition our economy and start producing millions of jobs in clean energy, because it turns out clean energy is more labor intensive than oil and gas. So it's going to produce more jobs per energy unit produced.
Possibly also, though, it'll be less financially lucrative for the US if it is more energy intensive. Maybe there might be more jobs, but America might be poorer as a consequence. Of course, you might think that's a reasonable trade-off, but is it a reasonable statement of facts?
Well, I think that we will export less energy than we do today, because much of the energy drilled on our lands is exported. It's not used here in this country. So the U.S. will have plenty of jobs, plenty of energy. It will export less. And that means, less money for the big corporations, more money for workers, because there's more of them getting paid higher dollar jobs.
Do you think the measures that President Biden has announced so far go far enough, specifically perhaps in terms of protecting wildlife and wild places?
Well, two things he did today. One is to commit the U.S. to protecting 30% of its land and water by 2030. That is very ambitious and completely in line with the national effort to protect 50% of the planet in 50 years. So he's right on target there. Now we'll see, can we actually implement that? But the plan's right on target. With fossil fuel reduction, it's really not fully where it needs to be.
Right.
For example, this pause he talks about, that's a pause to do a study to figure out what we need to do. He's not turning off the spigot here permanently.
Okay, so plenty more to be done, you believe. Kieran Suckling, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Chief Executive of the Centre for Biological Diversity.
And a couple of top headlines here on the BBC World Service this morning. The WHO specialists in China looking into the source of the coronavirus outbreak will be able to expand their investigations as they come out of quarantine today. We'll be hearing more about that in about 5 or 6 minutes' time. And the new US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, has pledged to stand with Southeast Asian nations in the face of Chinese pressure over the South China Sea.
Yeah, we're going to be hearing from Mr. Blinken in just a second on the subject of Russia, where in a few hours' time a Russian court will consider an appeal by the jailed opposition politician Alexei Navalny against his recent arrest. Russian authorities continue to take action against the leading government critic, with raids of properties yesterday linked to Mr. Navalny, his wife Yulia, and his anti-corruption foundation. The Kremlin critic was detained 10 days ago on his return to Russia following his treatment for nerve agent poisoning abroad. It prompted mass demonstrations in the streets of Moscow and elsewhere, which led to a tough clampdown by the security services. And the new US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, has expressed concern for the safety of Mr. Navalny at his first media briefing, saying he should not be silenced.
We have a deep concern for Mr. Navalny's safety and security. And the larger point is that his voice is the voice of many, many, many Russians, and it should be heard, not muzzled.
Well, we can speak now to Carl Bildt, co-chair of the European Council on Foreign Relations and a former Prime Minister of Sweden. Welcome once again to the programme. Are the US and others right to worry for the safety of Alexei Navalny?
Oh, absolutely. We can be absolutely certain that the Russian authorities, they will do whatever they can to stop what they have seen happening on the streets of more than 100 different locations around Russia. And to have him in prison or in Siberia for as long as possible. Unfortunately, that is the case.
So that is your conclusion on what is likely to happen next, then? He will go to prison, out of sight, out of mind.
I think that is undoubtedly the intention of the authorities. And unless there are not very strong, much stronger international reactions, I fear that is what's going to happen.
Yeah, talk us through then a potential scenario for international reactions. You want a stronger response on behalf of Europe, for example?
Yes, I think that would be appropriate. I think the message coming out of the meeting of the EU foreign ministers on Monday was rather feeble. Because they said, Mr. Borrell said there were no concrete plans on the table by anyone and he intends to go to Moscow. Well, it's true. It takes some time to take the measures and you need to prepare them. But the combination of that particular, or the different things that were said, was a rather feeble message from Europe. I don't know if London has said anything, but that doesn't count to the same extent any longer.
Why feeble? Because of internal divisions? Because they're simply not prepared to take on Russia over this issue?
I hope they are prepared to take on Russia. I think there's a recognition that it might be difficult. It is always difficult. You don't know if you really can influence the behavior of the Russian authorities. But I think it's very important as a signal of support to those who want to have respect for human rights and the rule of law and all of those things in Russia, that action is taken. And what might be done is what we call restrictive measures, that is targeted actions against individuals that are responsible for the repression against Mr. Navalny and those now supporting him that we see. And also for those who are not taking the action that should be taken. I mean, we should not forget that there were people who tried to kill Mr. Navalny. That's the origin of this particular crisis. And there have been repeated calls for something to be done against those, and of course nothing whatsoever has been done. And there must be people responsible for that as well that could well be on the list for restrictive measures by the EU and by the US and by others who stand on the same ground of democracy and human rights.
Carl Bildt, co-chair of the European Council of Foreign Relations, former Prime Minister of Sweden. Thank you very much for joining us.
And now let's head to China, because real work can now begin for a team of investigators from the World Health Organization. They're preparing to leave quarantine in the Chinese city of Wuhan and begin their investigation into the origins of the coronavirus pandemic. Well, the team arrived in China on January the 14th, but had to stay in mandatory quarantine for the past fortnight. Joining us now is our correspondent Steve McDonald, who's in Wuhan. Greetings to you, Stephen. So, what exactly will this team be able to do now that they're allowed to get out to work?
Well, the crucial difference is they can have face-to-face meetings from now on. So where I'm standing is outside the quarantine facility where they've been locked down for the last 2 weeks. They've already been having meetings with their Chinese counterparts via video link. They've started to do their research. But from now on they can, well, in theory, meet anybody they think is worth meeting. That could be people who've been sick with the coronavirus. It could be doctors. But they're not really doing their own research. What this is about is analysing the research being done on the ground by Chinese scientists and seeing what else needs to be done in terms of getting to the bottom of the coronavirus.
So, Steve, will they really get to the bottom of things? When you talk, it almost sounds like they're going to be led on a bit of a PR, course. Will they be able to find out more, to really dig deep and investigate?
You know, this is what everyone would like to know. I mean, and it's hard for us to gauge it, really. I mean, any minute now they'll be walking out of this facility